I have a confession to make. I've been preoccupied and not much work has gotten done since Wednesday night. It's the end of the semester, there are papers to be written, there are exams to be studied for, there are pages upon pages to be read, and I have not been productive since Wednesday evening because I've been preoccupied. My eyes have been glued to the TV since Thursday, wondering what the outcomes in Canton, Ohio would be this weekend. I'm sure there are some of you sitting here that did the same thing. It's simply amazing to think that out of our Mahoning Valley area, 3 teams would make it to the state championships in Canton. 2 of them, Canfield and South Range, would bring home state championships. And 1, John F. Kennedy, would play their hearts out but fall short. The only way possible for these teams to make it this far, and for Canfield and South Range to bring home a championship, is because every player on the team, every coach, every trainer, every cheerleader, every fan, every parent, every ball boy and water boy knew their role. Last night I was honored and blessed to be able to stand on the sidelines with the Kennedy football team, their coaches, their trainers. And although not the outcome we had hoped for, all those players played very, very hard because they knew their role. And I knew my role. My role was supporter and fan. There's no doubt in my mind that John the Baptist knew his role too. It's not a coincidence that the author of the Gospel writes where John the Baptist was on the shore, what he was wearing, what he was eating. He had a role to fulfill, just like those football players and coaches, just like the fans. Just like all of us that sat at home and watched on TV, rooting for our team. We all had a role to play. John the Baptist's role was to fulfill the Old Testament in the New. That's why the Gospel author tells us where he stood, with great detail, because he stood in the same exact place that Elijah stood at the end of his ministry when Elisha would take over in 2 Kings. John the Baptist stood in the same spot because he knew his role was to decrease so that Christ would increase. He was fulfilling, he was becoming another Elijah because the people believed that Elijah would come first, once again, before the Lord came. John the Baptist knew his role. He knew what he had to do. The football teams, the players, they knew their role. They knew when they were on offense, they knew when they were on defense, they had roles to play, and they had to make it happen. The question now is, do we know our role? Not at a football game, but right here, today, in this church. Right here, today, as we leave here and go forth this afternoon and into the week. Do we know our role? Do we know our role as baptized Christians is to be evangelists? Our baptism, like Jesus's, gives us a share in the roles of priest, prophet, and king. Do we know that our role is to go forth from here to repent and to prepare the way of the Lord, just as John the Baptist told us in the Gospel? Do we know that our role is to go forth and try very hard every day to see the person of Jesus Christ in every person we meet? Do we know our role to care for the poor and the vulnerable, to lift up those who are low, and to care for those who have no one to care for them? Do you know your role as parents, grandparents, children? Do we know our role as teacher or student? Do we know our role as faith-filled, baptized Christians? Through that baptism, given the gifts of the Spirit to dwell within us, to use those gifts of the Spirit that were laid out so beautifully in the first reading, to use those gifts of the Spirit to help carry out our role. My role currently, seminarian, son of the Father, student, probably should be working on some paper. But I had a different role the last couple days. We only have one role that is permanent forever. That is, as baptized Christians, as daughters and sons of a loving God who loves us more than we could ever imagine. The other roles that we take on in our lives are kind of fluid. They come and they go. But if we would act, if we would partake in every role that comes about in our life with the idea that we are loving, loved children of the Father, how great a role we would have. How great a role it would be. I know my role. I can tell you that all three of our teams from the area knew their role during their championship games. So now let's go forth from here today and pray, asking God, what's our role? What does God want our next role to be? Knowing that during this Advent season, we are called to repent and prepare the way of the Lord.